This video will concern the recent Grievance studies affair. If you don't know what that is, it was a hoax where 3 authors created bogus academic papers to submit to academic journals in areas like queer, gender, sexuality, fat, race, culture, etc. The hoaxers called those areas of study grievance studies because, in their words, they put social grievances ahead of objective truth.
The fields we're concerned about put social grievances ahead of objective truth. So as a simple summary, we call the problem grievance studies.
The authors say they submitted the bogus papers to test the hypothesis that poorly researched, ridiculous papers would be accepted by the so-called grievance studies journals as long as they were politically fashionable, like arguing that whiteness and masculinity are problematic and that privilege is inherently sinful. The first few papers they submitted, even though they were politically fashionable, were rejected. But rather than calling it a day and saying, okay, the peer reviewing is better than we thought, the hoaxers thought, that's no fun. We've already put our careers in jeopardy. We may as well double down on this hoax and work on writing better papers. And these later papers that they wrote were actually accepted by reputable journals. Eventually, after it was observed that one of the authors of a paper didn't exist, the journals found out they were being hoaxed, so they retracted the hoax papers. Now, based on the way that the authors described the papers, talking about rewording Mein Kampf to be feminist,
we rewrote a section of Mein Kampf as intersectional feminism, and this journal has accepted it.
or arguing that men should be treated like dogs.
The original point of that paper was to argue that rape culture is a big problem, and the best way that we could intervene upon that would be to train men the way we train dogs.
My initial impression was, ooh, if this stuff gets in, the peer reviewing must be pretty sloppy, and the journals need to up their standards. But then I considered that maybe the hoaxers actually wrote good papers, and were dishonestly portraying what they wrote as worse than it actually was. See, you can't submit any old crap to a reputable journal and expect it to be accepted just as long as it's politically fashionable. And the authors themselves demonstrated that when their first few papers were rejected.
Our first papers were really only suited to test the hypothesis that we could penetrate their leading journals with poorly researched hoax papers. That wasn't the case, and we were wrong for thinking we might be able to.
So I went digging for the hoax papers and took it upon myself to actually read them and see if they were indeed as ridiculous as the authors made them out to be. And not only, in my opinion, were the hoax papers pretty good, as in imaginative, very well researched, and genuinely informative, they also didn't correspond at all with how the authors described them. Let me highlight 2 papers in particular, starting with Your Struggle is My Struggle, Solidarity Feminism as an intersectional reply to neoliberal and choice feminism, in which the authors claimed to have rewritten Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf to make it politically fashionable. The text is not recognizable as Mein Kampf. The paper argues that choice feminism and neoliberal feminism are problematic, and offers what the authors call solidarity feminism as a preferable alternative. All those terms are defined clearly, the arguments flow well, counter-arguments are addressed, citations are provided, and a conclusion is reached. Aside from borrowing phrases here and there, it has nothing to do with Mein Kampf. Moreover, it's a good paper, and I actually learnt a lot from reading it. There are bizarre and obscure statements in there for sure. It is a hoax paper after all, but they're concealed in long passages of otherwise great text. As for the other paper I wish to judge, Human Reactions to Rape Culture and Queer Performativity at Urban Dog Parks in Portland, Oregon, the authors claimed that they advocated for treating men like dogs, which is disingenuous because, in the article, they clearly used leashing men as a metaphor for education about rape culture. I will grant that it is a weird metaphor, but the sentiment is acceptable, and the paper did not literally advocate disciplining men like dogs. So if the papers were good, what then did the authors really accomplish? Did they show that any old crap would be accepted as long as it was politically fashionable? And more the contrary, because their bad papers, though politically fashionable, were rejected. So what did they really show? That if you work really hard to write interesting, imaginative, well-researched papers, that you can make it through peer review and even receive distinctions? Because from what they accomplished, I can't really see how any other conclusions can be drawn. Especially when their bad papers were rejected, I don't think they exposed any corruption in these journals, or any lack of rigor in the peer reviewing. Although on the surface it sounds like they did a good job, when you look into it more deeply, it's hard to think of an outcome that so completely failed their intentions. In trying to trick the journals, they complied with their high standards. They wrote great papers, in spite of their scorn of the grievance genre. So they then sought to deceive the public by alleging that the papers were bad, when they knew full well that they were excellent papers. At the end of the day though, all that they really accomplished was to confirm the biases of anyone who already had it in for the grievance studies. But let me know what you think. If you happen to disagree with me, you're welcome to leave a comment. And with that said, thank you for watching, and I hope I made you consider this from another perspective.